Look, forcing a gender identity on a child, especially as a form of punishment, is abuse, pure and simple. And the reality is that I doubt that this is something that people really want to talk about, especially in terms of how often it likely happens. What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the Onyx Report, Black Masculinist news for the day. Trying to get back into daily form. We'll see how that works. It is that time of the semester where things get busy from here all the way through the end. So I'm trying to get back at it, but I hope you'll continue to support the channel nevertheless. Still, I'd also like to thank my subscribers for helping me reach 20,000 of you in terms of supporting the channel. Much appreciation to you, and hopefully we can continue to build from there. Now, today, we're going to be looking at an interesting piece that I ran across on Facebook. And you saw the thumbnail. Now, let me be clear. The thumbnail is not an actual picture of the boy in question. This was a purely written, Facebook post in a group, and there was no image included. So, that being said, I'm going to read it to you and then give a little bit of a response. All right. So it reads, "Good morning, everyone. I need some advice. I'm a stylist, and I had a woman make an appointment with me for her daughter to get her hair done this morning. And shortly thereafter, she comes in with this beautiful baby. Comes in and the baby's very tender-headed. And the mom is cursing at the child for crying out some because I had to comb out and detangle the baby's hair because she didn't prep the child's hair like she was asked. So the baby winced. There's a lot you can hear. Those are all the responses of people writing in on this piece, right? Goodness gracious. Okay, so I had to detangle the baby's hair. She didn't do what she was supposed to in terms of prepping the child. So the baby winced one last time, and she smacked the baby in the face. Right? So I don't play that mess. So I asked her to leave and go sit in the car. Y'all got to forgive me. The writing is, it's all over the place. Hard to get through at points. She says, only to find out after she walked outside that this was not a little girl at all. He was, in fact, her son. And he was being made to wear a dress because he cries when he has to get his hair done. So because he's a crybaby and act like a little girl, you punish him by making him wear dresses." I'm gonna read that last sentence again, right? So because he's a crybaby and act like a little girl, you punish him by making him wear dresses. Now it's already problematic because that actually isn't a quote from the mother. That's a quote from the woman who's writing this article. So it sounds to me like she's acknowledging the boy as a crybaby who acts like a little girl because he's in pain. That in and of itself is part of the problem. Right? Kind of emasculating idea that because boys feel pain, or men for that matter, that they're somehow effeminate. Anyway, so she continues, "Y'all, it's 7 a.m. and I already almost went to jail. As soon as the baby heard the door close and saw that his mother walked outside to the car, he immediately turned around to me and says, 'Please, Miss X, please don't do this to me. Please, I'm a boy. Please don't put ponytails in my hair. I am a little boy. She makes me wear dresses because she says I cry when I'm with her.'" And the lady asked, "Was I wrong for going off on her? Was I wrong for putting her out my place? Was I wrong for feeling like he needed to be protected from her?" End of piece. Now, I want to highlight, smacking the boy because he's in pain. Yeah, I would consider that a form of child abuse. And most particularly forcing the boy to have his hair done and to dress like a girl because he feels pain. Yeah, I would definitely consider that abuse. But when I said earlier that this more likely happens more often than people want to admit, I'm not necessarily talking about this exact scenario. What I am talking about, however, is the kind of pressure parents and adults can put on children about what they think their gender identity should be long before children are often even ready to have that conversation. I think that's what happens more often than people want to talk about. And the influence of an adult, a peer group, or a parent on a child about something like their gender representation, their gender identity, and how it presents to the world, I think is incredibly powerful, incredibly impactful. And I think we have such a zeal today in these kind of non-traditional gender performances. I think there's such zeal in media, such zeal in social media, that I think people are probably not only fairly liberal about the matter, but might go a little too far and start imposing their thoughts on others. And I think that in and of itself is ridiculous. And I think we need to be far more careful about it. And I think we need to actually have a discussion, because that's the problem. We're at a point where we can't even talk about it without people being afraid of being, basically called out and canceled in society for raising the question. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, as long as you're old enough to make to claim your own gender identity and articulate your own experience, I don't have a problem with that, most particularly among adults. And if you're engaged in activities where you're not hurting anyone else and no one's hurting you, hey, do what you gotta do. But when you start telling me that 3 and 4-year-olds are identifying their own gender identity, I have questions. And I just think we need to be very careful. And I say this as a father, because I know how delicate a child's sense of identity is, how malleable it can be, how impressionable it can be. And I try to take great care not to impose on my son what he should be, according to me, but to serve as an example to him in my actions and behavior. Those are two very different things. There's a difference between telling him what he's supposed to be and demonstrating it. And as far as him working out his own gender identity, just being on hand to have conversations about what was going on with him whenever it was going on. Hell, one of the biggest trials I have as a father is reminding him on a regular basis that I'm here for you, because I got to change hats, and parents understand this. I got to be the disciplinarian in one vein. I got to be the cheerleader in another vein. I lead in general in the household, but I can also sit down and listen. All these kind of dynamics play out. And sometimes kids can get, so used to a certain idea of you that you have to remind them that you can be there in different ways, just so you can maintain open lines of communication. But you, as a parent, still have to be incredibly responsible for the impact of how you raise them and what ideas you impose on them. And if you want to take this to where we just read about, if you want to take this to the extreme of where that can go, we're seeing in this story how a parent is using their own issues, using their own frustrations with the child as an excuse to impose, as a form of really, how would I put it? Not just embarrassing the child, but humiliating the child as a form of punishment. Public humiliation at that. Because it's not just something she apparently did in the house where she makes him dress up as a girl. She took him out in the public and got his hair done as a girl with a professional stylist. Right? That's public humiliation. So there are levels of abuse we can talk about that range from the physical to the psychological in regard to the hitting and the imposition of a very particular set of gender ideas that this mother decided to impose on her son. Now, one of the other interesting things I kind of want to point out, with all due respect, because, there were a lot of commenters that came in as I welcome on my page. And I was asked to make it public. So if you go to, Dr. T. Hasan Johnson on Facebook, you'll probably see this one up there. And one of the people who I generally respect, made a statement that I still, have to question. He said, well, where's the father? The father is, and there's this kind of subtle tone when I hear that seems to somehow blame fathers, even when, they have nothing to do with the situation. Again, and I've said this before, I've watched people go out of their way to create scenarios that somehow make a father responsible, even though we know nothing about the situation. I've said this and repeated case after case, especially in regard to child abuse. People will completely ignore that the mother is abusing the child and make the father somehow responsible, not knowing anything about the father at all. And I've told people, you don't even know if that man is alive. You don't even know if that man knows he has a child, if he was ever informed. You don't know if he lives in a different state. You know what I mean? We talked about that. Well, I talked a few weeks ago about the case where you had this woman who was leaving her kids for weeks at a time, one of whom had been abused by her boyfriend. The other one had been killed and left to rot in that apartment where they lived. And the boys lived there for a year by themselves, right? And immediately people started to blame the various kids' fathers. And one of the fathers, went public and he said, I've been looking for my son for years. You know what people's responses were? Still your fault. You should have known. You know how easy it is for a woman to take advantage of the law, take a child, especially across state lines, and virtually disappear. Do you think there are going to be droves of police officers driving around looking for her? Well, let's reverse the scenario. What if the father actually picked up the child for the weekend and left the state? Do you think there'll be a more aggressive search for him? I bet my money that it would be. My point simply is, we look for ways to blame fathers, even when fathers aren't even part of the scenario. As far as we know, and I'm talking about the scenario as we're given, be it an article, a news report, or in this instance, Facebook post. Now, maybe there was a father at home that didn't care. I have no idea. And that's the point. We have no idea. And we're willing to come up with all kinds of reasons to blame her. See, blame him. This goes back. The very kind of issues that we're talking about fundamentally in the Black community is in regard to gender. One, that we actually include Black men and Black boys as having a gender, because we don't. Gender is a feminine term as far as we're concerned. We don't treat Black men and boys as human, right? But on top of all of that, we don't actually look at the fact that at the end of the day, fathers' rights can be taken away quite easily with the support of the state. And we find ways to punish him and hyper punish him, whether he's involved or not. This is something we have to stop doing. Because we haven't even had a real conversation about how we end up with so many single parents in the Black community in the first place. The popular narrative we've heard since the early 1980s has been that Black men left the family. What we don't hear are the ways they've been driven out. Again, with the support of the state. Nobody wants to have that conversation, because that goes against the traditional narrative of men being the cause of all the Black community's ill or ills. So this is why we have to actually, use new vocabulary. We have to actually force conversations. We have to introduce new experiences, or at least experiences that Black men have been talking about amongst themselves for years. Because you don't get a Steven Spielberg led movie that comes out like in the early 80s with Color Purple that explains Black men's experiences and problems and frustrations with Black women. You don't get that. You don't even get that from Tyler Perry. Why? Because those movies don't seem to sell. Mainly because we're not the target audience. So that being said, Black men's stories have stayed hidden for quite a while. And I applaud brothers who are starting to speak up, starting to use the terms and concepts we're developing and explain what's going on with Black men and boys, and start pushing back against these really fundamentally racist and sexist narratives against Black males. And actually, like in the story I just read, seeing some of these boys as incredibly vulnerable, and having no protection. And somehow, if it's not his fault, and the only reason it's not considered his fault is because he's young, right? That's the only thing that's getting him off the hook for people from people who would probably blame him in the scenario just because he's male. But because he's young, he kind of gets it. So what do? We move to the next step. It's the father's fault. Wait, no, let's look at the situation. It's her fault. Stop deflecting. And I'm talking to feminists, and I'm also talking to men who look, to serve this kind of chivalrous white knight kind of dynamic where we come in and protect women from critique and analysis because it makes us uncomfortable. And it makes us uncomfortable because many of us have been socialized to prioritize women's worldviews, feelings, so on and so forth, experiences, especially those of us who've been raised by single mothers. We've learned to prioritize her way of looking at the world. So, and I've said this before as well. You know what I mean? When it's his fault, it's his fault. When it's her fault, it's his fault. Because that's how we've been taught. All right, y'all. Y'all have a good one. Hope to hear you see your comments in there in the comment section. Peace.